Hi everyone, this is Mukesh from learn-automation.com. Today in this video we'll talk about exception handling in Java. This is one of the main important topic in Java, and we are going to use exception handling so many times in our Selenium as well. So in this video I will mainly cover what exactly is exception, how to handle the exception, different ways to handle the exception, and then slowly we'll move how to handle exception in Selenium WebDriver. So in this video we'll talk about what exactly is exception, uh, what exactly is exception handling, the complete hierarchy of Java exception classes, like how the exception works, and the parent class of exception, parent class of throwable class, and so on. Because this hierarchy is very important, because once you start writing the try catch, and if you don't know this hierarchy, then you might get confused. So we'll see the hierarchy as well, and different type of exceptions. So we have three kind of exception, so we'll see one by one: checked, unchecked, and so on. Then finally we'll write a program to handle the exception. So before talking into technical terms, let's talk about in layman term what exactly is exception. So exception is nothing but like abnormal condition, or not a day-to-day activity. It's just that something exception, right? So abnormal condition. In the same way, Java also treat abnormal scenario as exception. Okay, so due to this exception, Java will terminate your current program. So let's say some activity is we are performing, or some test we are performing, and between some exception is coming, and if you do not handle the exception, it will terminate the complete program or your script. So it is mandatory to handle the exceptions. Okay, so sometime you might get runtime exception, which is very, some exception we can predict and we can handle them, but some are not in our hand. So we need to see the behavior, and then we need to implement this exception handling. So we'll see one by one. And in technical terms, exception is nothing but a plain Java class. Okay, and we have some parent class of exception as well, so we'll discuss. So we have seen what is exception. Now what is exception handling? So it is just a way to handle the exception. Okay, so exception can be compile time, runtime as well. So using exception handling, or I will say exception handling is just a term, but we have different ways to handle the exception. So once we start handling the exception, you will see your program will not terminate blindly. It will terminate gracefully with a proper message, so that you can understand easily what went wrong with my code. So the main reason of exception handling is to maintain the normal flow of your application. Very basic example I will give. Let's say you are a developer, and you created a small app which simply do some e-commerce, like some, you can buy some product and you can purchase them, right? Like select some items and enter the payment details, and user can buy the item. Now if you take one scenario when user do not enter any payment detail and hit the enter or hit the submit button, it should get a proper message, right? Like please enter the details or something. It should not uh, terminate your application, or I will say complete program blindly. It should close with a proper message, or it should give some proper validation. So we need to handle these exceptions. So if you take very basic scenario, let's consider you have 5 lines of code, and by some reason line 3 is throwing some exception. Okay, so if you do not handle this, it will terminate the program from line number 3, and it will not execute line number 4 and 5. So in order to maintain the complete flow, we can do the exception handling at line number 3 and 4. So at least the remaining 2 lines of code should get executed. Okay, it totally depends on a requirement. Do you want to really terminate the program after exception, but with a proper error message, or with a proper validation message? Okay, now before jumping into the exception class, this is how the hierarchy, like as we know, the top class in Java is object. Okay, and then we have one throwable class. Now we have two child classes of throwable, one is exception and one is error. Okay, So error also you will get once you start working with assertions, which is in TestNG. Okay, so I will show you now example when you will get error, when you will get exception, but both are different categories. Okay, so we'll talk about exception, which you can see on the left hand side, and then we have errors as well. Again, in exceptions we have so many exceptions like IO exception, SQL exception, and there are so many. So exception also we have two kind of exception: runtime, compile time, that we'll see in few minutes. But this is just a high level overview. Like we have throwable is the parent class of exception, and object class is the parent class of throwable. So let's see one by one. So we have three kind of exception. One is checked exception, which is also known as uh, checked exception, unchecked exception, and error. So checked exception is also known as compile time exception. It means until you don't handle them, you will not be able to compile your code itself. Okay, so compiler will detect at the compilation time, and it will give you proper message that please handle the exception. And if you are using some IDE like Eclipse or NetBeans, then it will give you proper I will say suggestions like use try catch or use throws. Okay, so whenever you are getting exception at compile time itself or while writing the code, it is called as checked exception. We have unchecked exception, which is called as runtime exceptions. Okay, like when you write the code, syntax is correct, but when you run them, you will see like your logic is incorrect. Okay, so while runtime it will throw some exception, like you have assigned some null value, so at compile time looks fine, but when you actually run your code, you will get null pointer exception, index out of bound exception, and there's so many. So if you're getting exception at runtime, this is also known as runtime exception, or you can say unchecked. Now the last one is error. So some errors you will get frequently, okay, like out of memory errors, virtual machine error, assertion error, and so on. So we'll see one by one, but let's see the ways to handle the exception. First way is using try catch block. Okay, so first of all, try and catch both are the keywords which are reserved keyword in Java, which will allow you or which will help you to handle the exception. So in the try block, you need to write the code which might throw exception. Okay, and the catch block, you need to write which class it is. Okay, so in catch block, you need to write the exactly which exception it is throwing. And if you don't know the exception, you can write some parent class or super class of the exception class as well. I will show you. So Java try block must be followed either with catch or finally. You cannot keep only try. It must be followed either with catch block or finally block. Okay, so let me show you one by one. So this is Eclipse. Let me create a fresh package, but before jumping into, this is I will show you this right now. I will check for exception Java doc. Okay, it will take some time to load. In the meanwhile, I will create a fresh package and I will say this is exception handling, and I will create a class here. Okay, and by default you can see we are getting a super class which is nothing but object class. So let me click on finish. So first of all, I will write a small piece of code which will simply do the some division operation. So I will say int c equal to 10 by 0. Okay, so you can see right now it is not throwing any error because syntax is fine. I'm dividing number by number, so definitely should give me some result, right? So if I say division result is, ideally it should give me some, let me put first divide by 2 and let's run the code. Definitely it will give me 5, which is expected, right? Now if I divide by 0, definitely if I divide any number by 0 we'll get infinite result, and infinite we cannot store into integer. So this time it will throw exception. So just right click again and run as Java application, and you will see at console it is throwing arithmetic exception. So whenever you see some exception, just try to read it. And the way how to read, you need to always start in the reverse direction. So do not start from top, just see at which line it is throwing the exception. So Java will give you a very beautiful way, like this is the package. So exception handling is a package, exception handling is a class, main is a method, and exactly line number 8 you have some error. So if you click on it, it will highlight like there's some issue with this particular line of code. And if you again see, it will show you it is throwing some arithmetic exception, which is nothing but divide by 0. So logically it is not correct. Okay, so now if you want to see how exactly it is behaving, so if I put one sysout statement and I will say this is the start, and again if I put one end, so you will see when I run this code, it will print start, it will do this operation. Okay, but while doing this it will throw exception, so it will not print this piece of code, and it will not print this piece of code. It will terminate my program directly from here. So we need to handle this exception gracefully, and we need to tell user what went wrong, right? So the first way of handling try catch, sorry, the handling exception is using try catch. So try and catch, but before jumping into try catch, let me show you how exactly internally these classes are. So you can see we are getting one arithmetic exception. So just copy this and just write arithmetic exception. Yeah, you will see this Java documentation, and this is how the hierarchy is. This is what I was explaining. So arithmetic exception is a part of runtime exception. First of all, runtime exception is child class of exception. Exception is a child class of throwable, and throwable is a child class of object. And you will see they have given very beautiful description what exactly this exception is. They have written whenever you divide any integer divide by 0, it will throw this exception. It also has two constructors, and you will see the constructor details. Okay, so whenever you get any exception, do not panic, just try to search that exception, what exactly this exception is, and who is the parent class and why this exception is coming. They have maintained a beautiful documentation for each and every exception. Okay, so if you're using Eclipse, just write try and control space, you will get this option. One is try catch and another is using try finally. So you can just double click on it, automatically the code will come, but I will try to write from scratch. So I will just write try, and since it's a reserved keyword, you can see it's coming in a different color. So just start the try and end. Now within the try block, you need to write the piece of code which can throw exception. Okay, so as of now we can see this piece of code is throwing exception, and we will also write this piece of code, like if this logic is correct, then it will print the result, and in case something went wrong, then it should come to either catch or finally. And you can see if I have only tried, Java is throwing me error. It says please okay, enter either finally or catch block. So I will write catch. Now there's one syntax for catch block as well. So just write catch, okay, and then write which exception it is throwing. So I will write arithmetic exception. Control space, it will give you some suggestions. Just click on the first one, and after this give one space and give one object. Okay, so you can give any name. I can give ABC XYZ. So whatever exception will come, it will get stored in E object. Any information which is coming, it gets stored in E, and if you want to see this message, you can just do sysout and say I will first print, I will say something went wrong, please check the exception. plus e dot. When you say e, you will see couple of methods are coming. So I will say e dot get message, like whatever exception is coming, just give me that specific message. And this is one more sysout I will say, that I will say seems you have entered 0, please provide value which is greater than 0. And finally you can say end, so at least your program will end gracefully, like until user do not provide the correct information. So let's try to run this code and let's see. Right click, run as Java application, and you can see it is not throwing exception, it is handling the exception, it is coming to catch block and it is printing this message first of all. So e dot get message is nothing but divide by 0, and then our custom message is coming which we have written, and finally the end. So your program is not terminating blindly, it is terminating or I will say it is completing the flow with a proper error message. So this is how you can handle one exception. Okay, now if I show you in the debug mode, just put one small breakpoint either using double click or just right click and say toggle breakpoint, and right click and I will say debug as Java application. Okay, so you can see the window is coming in the debug perspective. It has already printed start. Now let's try to evaluate. Okay, anyways this will give me infinite, so when I press F6, control is directly coming to catch block. It skipped this statement and directly it's coming to this, and when I press F6, now this E will have all the information about the exception which we got. So it is throwing java.lang arithmetic exception divide by 0, and a couple of more details. Okay, now it will print this, and it will come to end, and finally your program exit. Right, so using try catch you can handle the exception. Now finally is optional. Okay, if you have catch you can skip finally. I will explain the finally in the next program. Now let's create another class and just copy paste. Okay, so now finally is again a keyword. Okay, so just write finally and suggestion will come, and when you hit enter automatically Java like Eclipse will give you this code. Finally just a keyword, start and end, and you can write some statement finally block, and as the name says finally, it means it doesn't matter whether your program has some exception or not, this piece of code will always run. Okay, so sometimes it is very good practice to keep finally, because if something went wrong it will print some message or some activity. If it is working fine, then also it will say like program completed or exited. Now finally is very important when you're working with file handling or database, because whenever you're done with your operation it is mandatory to close all the operations, or sorry, all the files or the database connections. Now if you run this code again, you will see finally block and end. This will always come. Right, now one another very interesting question, like right now we are aware that arithmetic exception is coming, so I can give the exception here, but what about if I don't know the exception? Okay, you can give multiple catches as well. So you can give like chances are very high user can also give Mukesh 10 divided by Mukesh, right? So in that case also it will fail, because arithmetic exception will only handle your divide by 0, but if some other exception is coming then it will not be able to handle. So I can give multiple catch here, and I can give input mismatch exception as well. There's another class called input mismatch exception. Okay, and I can also give once it's out here, and I will say, hey, something went wrong. I can say, oops, something went wrong. We will get back to you as soon as possible. Whatever print statement you want to write, you can keep. So whenever any exception comes related to divide by zero, this catch will handle. If any of the exception is coming like related to input, this will handle. And something went wrong, like your out of memory or something, this will handle. Okay, sorry, out of memory is error, but if some other exception is coming, this will be able to handle it. Now there's one small trick, and this is the interview question. So if you keep exception at start, okay, this type of questions you will get it while giving some written test. You need to find out the errors. You can see when you write the parent class before this exception, like arithmetic exception, input mismatch, now Java is giving error because everything this base class will handle. Any exception will come, this parent class will handle. So control will never reach to this piece of code, correct? Because everything our parent class have handled. So this is called the dead code or unreachable code. So sometime if you get this question, what is dead code in Java, do not get panic. This is what the dead code is. Dead code is the code which will never get executed. So Java never recommend dead code, so you will keep getting this error, that unreachable catch block, because it is already handled by the parent. So always make sure this parent class should come at last. Okay, you can keep throwable, you can keep object, but throwable is fine, you cannot keep object. So this is one way to handle the exception. Okay, so in the next video I will show you how to use throws. Okay, throws is not a way, but it is just a way to skip from current execution or current point, so that code should not get lengthy. You have to handle the exception anyways, you cannot skip using throws, but how to use the throws and how exactly it works we will see in the next video. Okay, so you can give a try. And one last thing, just check for input mismatch exception. And yes, input mismatch exception is a child class of no such element exception. It is kind of uh, it belongs to runtime exception, right? Because user will do the input at runtime, and generally it throws by scanner class whenever you take any input from the user and if it does not match with the pattern. So like this you will get couple of exception which you can handle using try catch. Another is throws, which we'll see in the next video. Okay, so if you have any doubt, just let me know in the comment section. Thank you so much. Have a nice day. Bye bye.